They told you Russia was unstoppable. They told you that Putin had built the single most terrifying aerial war machine in the history of human conflict, a monster of steel, propellant, and fire. And nothing this planet could stand in its way. They showed you the satellite images of Russian missile factories churning through the night. Production lines, running 24 hours a day, 7 days missiles, and ballistic warheads a fawn to match. Nation on Earth at a pace that no nation on Earth could afford to match. They told you Ukraine was already dead. They told you the lights would never come back on. They told you Kiev would be on its knees before the snow melted. That was Russia's story. That was the Kremlin script written in the blood of cities, signed in the ashes of apartment buildings, and broadcast to a watching world as what 21st century imperial power looks like. And for a time, a terrifying time, it looked like that script might actually come. Energy grids collapsed. Hospitals ran on generators. Families huddled in bomb shelters, listening to the sound of death screaming overhead. President said there was not a single electricity generating facility the Russians had not. Between October 2025 and mid-January, 56 dedicated strikes on the country launched systematically. 6 from this alone, the country was being systematically disassembled from the sky. But here's the thing about Russia's script. Ukraine didn't read it. Ukraine wrote its own, and on April 27, 2026, the day this script was researched and written, the world is looking at it so stunning, so militarily jaw-dropping that even the most battle-hardened analysts, are struggling to find language adequate to describe it. Ukraine's now intercept nearly 9 and 10 Russian aerial weapons before they reach their targets, 9 out of 10. In March 2026, which broke every record ever set for the volume of Russian aerial attacks, Ukraine destroyed or suppressed 5,090 weapons in a single month. Russia launched 6,462 one-way attack drones in March, a new all-time record, and Ukraine swatted 90% of them out of the sky. In the last 24 hours, the 24 hours before this, the script was written. On April 26, 2026, Russia launched 4 of them. Ukraine's air defense destroyed 124 of them. That is an 86% kill rate on a random Monday night. In the middle of a war that Russia has been fighting for over 4 years. Meanwhile, on that same night, Ukrainian drones struck 3 Russian warships and a MiG-31 fighter jet in occupied Crimea. Ukrainian drones set fire to the Yaroslav fill inside, processed a strategically critical facility, the fasting 15 million tons of crude oil per year, producing the jet fuel and diesel that feeds Russia's own military machine. Europe's largest chemical plants in Chernihiv, 800 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Ukraine attacked a chemical fertilizer plant in Vagda Oblast. Ukraine struck Belgar, Tambov, and Yar simultaneously in a single coordinated strike campaign. This is not the Ukraine that was supposed to exist. This is not the country that Russia calculated it was invading. The country Russia invaded was a relatively small, relatively poor nation with a pre-war defense industry that Ukraine's own president described as, quote, unfortunately helpless. That country is gone. In its place stands something that no general in Moscow's military planning rooms ever modeled, never anticipated, and cannot now undo. Through 4 years of industrial revolution fought under missile fire, the most battle-tested, most cost-effective, most innovative, most cost-effective aerial defense nation on Earth, and Russia, the country with the world's largest nuclear arsenal and a military entire GDP, cannot make its missiles land where it wants them to land. Russia's missile empire is impotent, and today, in 5 sections, with every single data point pulled from today's battlefield reality, we are going to show you exactly how that happened, what technologies did it, what numbers prove it, and why it is going to change warfare for every nation on this planet for the next generation. Strap in. Because what Ukraine has done is not just a military story, it is one of the most remarkable stories in the history of human civilization's relationship with war. And it is happening right now. Let us talk numbers, because in war, numbers are the only language that cuts through propaganda spin, and the numbers from the skies above Ukraine end. The first quarter of 2026 are not just significant, they mark a near total demolition of a modern military strategy. Russia had a strategy, and in the beginning it worked exactly as intended against Ukraine's air defense systems. The plan was simple: overwhelm expensive Westerns air defenses using cheap mass-produced drones and missiles until interceptors run out. Once interceptor stocks were exhausted, the skies would open, would gain uncontested, would collapse, and Russia would increase 3 MS aerial dominance. Here was the arithmetic behind that strategy. A Patriot PAC-3 MSE missile costs over $3 million per interceptor round. A Nissan's interceptor costs more than $1 million, making every defensive action actually expensive for Ukraine to sustain long term. Meanwhile, Russian Shaheds drones cost between $20,000 and $50,000 to manufacture at scale. This created a powerful economic equation where cheap drones forced Ukraine to spend massive amounts defending every incoming threat. Russia believed that by flooding the skies, Ukraine would eventually bleed out financially and militarily under constant pressure. It was designed as a war of economic attrition where would determine the ultimate outcome. With an economy far larger and a fully militarized industrial base since 2022, Russia expected to win. But the interception rate data completely is a dramatic shift in battlefield. Ukraine's interception rate rose from 80.2% in December 92% by March 2026. That is a 9.7 percentage point increase in just 3 months under intensifying aerial assault conditions. In February, Russia launched over 5,000 aerial weapons, and in March that number rose 28%, 600. This represents a 28% increase. Yet Ukraine still improved its interception efficiency despite the growing volume. More attacks came in, yet a percentage was intercepted, proving the defense was faster than the offense. The harder Russia pushed, the more effective Ukraine's defensive. In early April 2020, that pressure. An early April 2026 report, and all confirmed this trend, showing that despite record launch sharply, the Russian identified 3 key factors: interceptor drones, mobile fire groups, and layered defense architecture improvements. These elements combine to transform Ukraine's air defense into a flexible, adaptive, and increasingly efficient system. Ukraine's defense leadership set a target to intercept at. Given recent trends, this goal is not aerial threats. Given recent trends, this goal is not unrealistic. It represents a clear trajectory already visible in NOF data. Ukraine is moving toward a point where Russia's entire aerial campaign becomes strategically irrelevant over time. But there is another dimension to this transformation of making. That makes these numbers even more striking: the cost factor. Previously, Ukraine relied heavily on expensive Western missiles, creating an unsustainable cost imbalance. Interception cost Russia to many times more than it cost Russia to produce and launch that same weapon. I assure you that imbalance has now been broken through the introduction and scaling of Lucas interceptor technology. 1 in every 3 Russian aerial targets is now destroyed by Ukrainian interceptor drones, costing only a few $1,000s. In the KV region, over 70% of Shahed drone kills in February 2026 came from these interceptor drones destroyed. Over 33,000 enemy drones across all active fronts. This was double the far from the previous month. Showing rapid scaling and increasing operational effectiveness. The kill count is rising sharply while the cost per interception is dropping dramatically at the same time. On April 25th, Russia launched hundreds of drones in Ukrainian overnight across multiple missiles regions defense simultaneously. Ukraine's to intercept or suppress nearly all of them, leaving only a small fraction reaching targets. Despite this success, civilian areas still suffered with casualties reported, including children and injured residents. Buildings were damaged. Rescue operations continued overnight. These numbers are not abstract statistics. They represent real lives affected by every successful or strikes. Failed levels. Even at peak attack levels, only about 1 in 10 Russian weapons is successfully reaching its intended target. The destruction seen in media represents Russia's most failed attempts. It reflects a small shrift that gets through. It reflects the small percentiles that gets through, not the overwhelming majority that is intercepted or neutralized. Total Russian military losses since early 2020 figures have reached over 10 million personnel, according to updated figures. In a single day alone, hundreds of soldiers can be lost, reflecting the sustained intensity of the conflict. Every major metric in this war is pointing in the same direction. A consistent and accelerating strategic failure, and with each passing month, the speed of that loss is increasing. You want to understand how Ukraine did this? You want to understand how a country under full-scale military invasion with its economy under siege, its energy infrastructure deliberately demolished, its cities lit up night after night by incoming fire, managed to build what is now recognized as the most effective, innovative, and most scalable air defense architecture on the planet. The answer is a technology revolution. One that happened not in government research facilities, not in Pentagon research facilities, not in boardrooms of Western defense contractors, but in warehouses, volunteer workshops, and software offices where engineers worked, through air raids never seen to build something the world an interceptor drone before. That something is the interceptor drone, and it has completely rewritten the rules of aerial warfare. The devastatingly simple in principle and ferociously difficult in execution. Instead of firing an expensive guided missile at an incoming drone, you fly a cheap drone directly into it. The economics are transformative. A Russian Shahed cost Russia between 20,000 a Ukrainian-developed intercept. This oximate interceptors costs are 2,000 built by a volunteer group built by a volunteer group called Wild Hornets. Originally funded by charitable donations, nearly shut down in early 5 due to money problems and now producing over 10,000 units per month, with confirmed kills in tens of thousands. The Sting has a 3D printed aerodynamic frame, flies at speeds up to 343 kilometers per hour and cruises at high altitudes to see and track targets at night, and as of April 2026 is responsible for 70% of interceptions of all intercepted terrain. But the breakthrough that made international headlines in April 2026 was not just capability. It was how far away it could operate. On April 4, 2026, a Ukrainian drone operator with the call sign Hulk serving in the Bulava unit used a Sting interceptor to destroy 2 Russian Shahed-type drones simultaneously from a distant distance of 500 kilometers. The operator was not sitting next to the launch site. He was controlling the kill from across the country using the Hornet null system control system, a drone control technology released by Wild Hornets in March 2026 with high definition over distances previously thought impossible. Before this a system if intercept range was typically limited to 20 to 30 kilometers. Now a single operational area exceeding 100 kilometers and engage targets at 500 kilometers. And it gets even more extraordinary than that. On April 21, 2026, in a way that left defense analysts struggling to process what they were seeing. For the first time in the history of warfare, Ukraine's unmanned systems forces launched an interceptor drone from an unmanned surface vessel, a sea drone, to shoot down a Russian Shahed lying over the Black Sea. The 4-star 12th Brigade Nemesis conducted the world's first sea launch drone-on-drone intercept. It is hunting Russian missiles from naval drones that cost a fraction of the ships they replace. The war has moved to a dimension of unmanned versus unmanned combat that the world's most advanced military powers are now to understand. Ukraine's interceptor forces are not a single technology. They are a layered ecosystem of overlapping kill systems working together. Cheap FPV quadcopters handle last kilometer kills, a power station or an apartment block. Faster fixed-wing pursuit interceptors handle higher speed targets like the jet, powered Durian 3 variants with an improved speed. Networked systems link interceptor nodes across entire sectors, sharing targeting data so that a single incoming drone can be tracked handed off between crews and killed as it crosses territorial boundaries. Electronic warfare teams sit in integrated command who post alongside air defense officers, setting jamming frequencies so threats operate on clean signals despite ECM interference and threading through all of it artificial intelligence. Ukrainian and foreign developers working with Ukraine have been integrating machine learning systems into tuned NATO observers. Developers with Ukraine's National Guard firm to Romite that they are already deep in tactical battlefield practical autonomy, the ability for a drone to recognize its target, lock on, and pursue without a human operator guiding every move. Russian drone engineers responded by arming shots with rear-facing thermal cameras, spotlights, and by equipping some Shaheds with air-to-air missiles to shoot back at interceptors. Ukraine's engineers responded to Russia's response. This is an innovation war within the shooting. War in Ukraine is winning it at every iteration. The scale of Ukraine's drone industrial base as of today needs to be read twice. Ukraine plans to produce more than 7 million drones in 2026. Ukraine's Deputy Defense Minister confirmed this, stating that unmanned technologies Ukraine asymmetry have become the backbone of Ukraine's asymmetric defense strategy and force strike zone from 20 km to 100 km in depth. As of April 2026, approximately 500 domestic manufacturers fair-produced drones in Ukraine. Before the full-scale invasion, there were 7. The defense industrial base now has an estimated $5 billion. Ukraine is not just defending its technology. Ukraine has become a technology superpower forged entirely in the fire of existential war. But this story is not, it has never been purely about defense. Because while Ukraine was building the most lethal interception architecture in the history of aerial warfare, something else was happening in the other direction. Ukraine was pointing the same industrial revolution, the same engineering genius, the same relentless war tide in 2026 at Russia's. Is not just stopping Russia's missiles. Ukraine is burning down the factories that build them. Ukraine is setting fire to factories that build them. Ukraine is fire to the refineries that fuel them. Ukraine is sinking the ships that project Russia's power. Ukraine is reaching deeper and deeper into Russian territory with domestic weapons that nobody in Moscow planned for and nobody in the Kremlin knows how to stop. In the last 48 hours alone before the script was written, the most comprehensive retaliatory strike packages of the entire war over the Yaroslav oil, Ukrainian-arranged drones struck the Yaroslav oil refinery, officially known as Slav Nefanos facility, 800 kilometers inside Russian territory, processing 15 million tons of crude oil per year, and supplies Russia's military diesel and jet fuel that supplies Russia's military logistics chain. The General Staff confirmed the strike, confirmed the fire. Ukraine also struck one of Europe's largest chemical fertilizer plants in Chervitsa Oblast, again, suffered acid burns from Ukraine's border. 5. People suffered acid from a burst high-pressure pipeline. 10 people were injured in total. At the same time, the Security Service of Ukraine Alpha Special Forces units long-range drones struck Russian naval ass at the Sevastopol naval base in warships, EMEA damaging 3 jet at the Belbek and a MiG-31 fighter jet at the Belbek military airfield. The April 25th, Ukrainian drones struck Yekaterinburg for the first time in a Uklaksinid, the war at a record distance of approximately 1,800 kilometers. Ride that number slowly, 50 kilometers. Ukraine has already declared through Zelensky that its drones have achieved a historic range of exactly 50 on Zelensky. The highest range of our drones 7 to 13. There will be more. Zelensky, not about records, there will be more. This is not about records, but about justice that will find evil anywhere in the world. These are not idle words. Confirmed by strike after strike, fire after fire, that deep inside Russian territory that the Kremlin population once assumed was completely untouchable. The weapons Ukraine is using to reach this deep are domestically developed Flamingo, Rudapeklo, Neptune, Polyanuchish, Vilha. These are not NATO weapons. These are not NATO weapons built American-supplied systems, named by Ukrainian soldiers, reaching targets that Putin's generals told the Russian populace beyond reach. The Polonisha missile drone, described as an entirely new laser of weapon, combining missile and drone characteristics, has been used against targets inside Russia. Ukraine's first domestically developed ballistic missile passed flight tests and has been publicly confirmed by Zelensky. It's now producing long-range missile tests. Zelensky said explicitly on April 13th, but a real force that is already operating. The strategic logic behind striking Russian oil infrastructure is, it is precise and calculated. Since War Machine runs on oil, this Ukrainian drone strikes have damaged or destroyed approximately 20% of Russia's total oil refining capacity. In April 20, to reduce oil production by roughly 300,000 to 400,000 barrels, 1,000 to 400,000, drop in approximately 6 years, the sharpest monthly 6 years because of Ukrainian strikes on key refineries, ports, and export hubs. It has struck Primorsk, it has struck Tuops, it has struck Yaroslavl. It struck a Pantsir S-1 air defense system in Mariupol. It struck a Kasta 2E-1 radar rest. It has struck a 2E radar station in Malawi and occupied dates. Each strike is a calculated attack on the systemic infrastructure that allows Russia to fund, fuel, and project its military power. Ukraine has also struck Crimea in Russia's ability to use it as a forward, Russia's ability EFIS military base. 3 military ships damaged overnight on April 26. The Spelb airfield, the Catch Sevastopol, all struck in coordinated waves. Russian-installed Sevastopol governor Mikhail Razi claimed air defense down 71 Ukrainian drones in the April 26th, far more than 71, at the peninsula in a single night. The Black Sea Fleet, which Russia used to dominate with impunity, has been forced back into port, degraded by Ukrainian naval drone attacks to the blue point where it can no longer safely operate in western Black Sea waters. Ukraine did not have a navy capable of challenging Russia when this war began. It now controls the waters that Russia thought it owned permanently. The export dimension of this story is also extraordinary. Ukraine has signed a 10-year defense partnership with Qatar. The Gulf states facing Iranian drone threats of their own have made overtures to Ukraine to purchase Interceptor drone technology. Zelensky confirmed that Ukrainian interceptor systems are already operating in the Middle East, whose annual export capacity for long-range weapons alone may exceed $35 billion by end of 2026. Is transforming from a recipient of military aid into an exporter of military solutions. The country that the entire world was sending weapons to in 2022 is now selling weapons to the world in 2026. That transformation that comes under continuous missile, under with no pause missile, fire with no pause, and the killing is one of the most breathtaking industrial stories of the modern era. There are moments in the history of warfare when a conflict produces a lesson so fundamental, so impossible to ignore, that demonstrated military on earth is forced, physical street to absorb it in real time. The trenches, the First World War killed charges forever. The Battle of Britain proved that a determined nation with superior technology could deny the skies to an overwhelming ground power. The Fallens proved that anti-ship missiles could sink modern warships in minutes. That Ukraine is teaching the world a targeting that will be studied in every military academy on earth for the next 100 years. The lesson is this: in the age of drone swarm warfare, the nation that can autonomous systems and layered defense architecture will defeat the nation that fights inexpensively and in mass. The logic of attrition has inverted, and Ukraine inverted it. The old air defense doctrine built over the Cold War and refined for the conflicts of the 1990s and 2000 specific assumption that aerial threats arrived in manageable numbers, that each incoming missile or aircraft was a high V-value, high-cost target worth engaging with each high-value, high-cost interceptor, and that the defender's goal was to maintain a sufficient stock of those expensive interceptors to address a realistic threat load. That dope in which Russia fired 20 cruise missiles at a time and called it cruise missiles a major strike, a world in which Russia fires 6,000 drones in a single month. The doctrine broke, and the catastrophic vulnerability exposed that modern air defense missile systems can be economically exhausted by cheap drone swarms far faster than they can be resupplied is now the most urgent security challenge. Ukraine's answer to this challenge has become the new doctrine. The core principle is devastatingly elegant: match the cost of your interceptor to the cost of the incoming threat. Your interceptor should cost $3,000. The kill ratio does not need to be perfect. It needs to be sustainable. A 60% success rate by an interceptor that costs 1/120th of its target is an economic victory for the defender every single team. Scale tell that across 10,000 interceptors a month in production, and you have not just a defense capability, you have a mathematical guarantee that the attacker bleeds out economically faster than the defender. Ukraine proved this works not in a simulation, not in a war game in the actual sky above actual Ukrainian cities against the actual Russian military in real time for 4 years. NATO is absorbing this lesson at speed. The US, the UK, France, Germany, every major Western military power has had observers in Ukraine studying the Interceptor Drone E-25. Since its emergence in Ukraine defense, cooperations has held multiple briefing institutes specifically on adapting Ukraine's low-cost interceptor model for NATO allies. The future of air defense is cheap, fast, numerous, and AI-enabled, not expensive, slow, and finite. The Patriot battery will remain essential. It is the only system one trees currently able to address advanced ballistic missile threats. But it cannot be the only layer. Ukraine demonstrated that the layer's autonomous, cheap interceptors operating inorked swarms are what determine whether the Patriots' expensive rounds are saved for genuine threats or wasted on drones that a con of 2,000 ropes it could have destroyed instead. The global context makes lesson even more urgent. The U.S. military and its Gulf partners expended extraordinary quantities of Patriot interceptors during Operation Epic Fury that took place in early 2026. The strike campaign burned through hundreds of the missiles in its first days, creating a global shortage of high-end interceptor stocks that exposed the fragility of the entire Western air defense supply chain. The world suddenly understood intersensitive spinsters. Stockpiles is dangerous and inadequate against the mass drone and missile was fandus and warfare that Russia introduced above Ukraine and that Iran has now extended across the Middle East. Ukraine's $2,000 answer to that problem is no longer a battlefield strategic necessity. Consider what Russia accidentally paid for with its four years of missile and drone attacks on Ukraine. But every Shahed that hit a Ukrainian target caused terrible damage, and 90% of them were provided Ukrainian engineers with real-world data on drone, baggage, guidance systems, package, thermal, signatures, and flight characteristics. Russia's countermeasures rear-facing infrared, spotlights to blind thermal cameras, daytime attacks designed to exploit thermal sensor degradation in sunlight, foam and decoy drones and and plywood decoy drones designed to exhaust interceptors. Each innovation became a problem statement for Ukraine's engineers. Ukrainian most demanding real-time testing environment solved each problem faster than environments Russia could create the next one. Russia paid for Ukraine's research and development. Russia is the reason Ukraine's interceptor in human history, the most battle-proven in human history. Russia deployed its psychological war Orishnik hypersonic missile against Ukraine twice, once in November 2024 and once in January 2026 when it struck civilian infrastructure in the Lviv region. Putin personally described the Hornets defense system on Earth and claimed it was immune to any defense system on Earth, adding that several used conventionally could replicate the destructive power of a nuclear strike. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas responded immediately. Putin does not want peace. Russia's reply to diplomacy is more missiles and destruction. A Lviv resident recorded immediately after the January 2026 Oreshnik strike said simply, "I just want everyone in the world to know that, and we do not care how many missiles you send. That is the psychological war." Russia fired its most terrifying weapon to break Ukrainian will. A civilian standing in the rubble told the world that is annihilation of the psychological campaign. The ceasefire Russia announced for Orthodox Easter, April 11th and 12th, 2026 was violated nearly 300 times according to Ukrainian military records. Almost 2,000 of those violations were confirmed by Russia's own admissions. Russia used the not peace, it was a reload. Russia used the pause to stockpile weapons for the strikes that following a pattern now so well documented that Ukrainian commanders planned their defense posture around it. Ukraine used the same pause to repair, reposition, and upgrade. Both sides know what ceasefires mean in this war. They mean the next wave is coming. And Ukraine prepares for the next wave the same way it has prepared for every wave since February 2022 by becoming better at killing it than it was the day before. Today, April 27th, 126, Ukraine is a different nation than the ones Russia invaded. It is a nation that plans to produce 7 million drones this year. A nation whose defense manufactures and has an annual capacity approaching $35 billion. A nation whose long-range drones have struck targets 1,800 kilometers inside Russia. A nation that is burning Russia's oil refineries, sinking Russia's warships, and destroying Russia's radar systems simultaneous in a single work. A Interception drone from Havel drones can kill nights away, launched from a naval drone in the Black Sea controlled by a pilot, sitting in an office in another city. A nation that has shared its air defense expertise with the Gulf states, defense partnerships with Qatar and Saudi Arabia, and is in discussions to export its weapons to over a dozen countries. Russia threw everything it had at Ukraine. Russia broke its economy to militarize its industry. Russia sacrificed 1,025,000 soldiers to this war. Russia fired its phonics missiles and its cruise missiles and its ballisticoys and its suicide drones and its decoys and its electronic warfare packages and its rear-facing infrared spotlights and its drone-mounted air-to-air missiles. Russia did all of this and Ukraine caught 90%, burned by evidence, then turned around and hit Russia's oil refineries, Russia's chemical plants, Russia's radar stations, and Russia's military trains in the same night with those missiles made in Ukraine. Russia's missiles can't get through. And the ones that cannot get through are not just failing, they are failing as the world watches, taking notes, crew writing Doctrine, and preparing to build what Ukraine built, the future of air defense. A future that is cheap, that is scalable, that is autonomous, that is worked, and that is made above all of the single most powerful military material ever discovered. The refusal of a free people to accept the terms of their own annihilation. Ukraine did not just survive Russia's missile empire. Ukraine made it impotent. And the lesson, it is written in the sky above it. Cities will echo through the history of warfare for longer than any missile flies.